Welcome to Treasure Valley Podcast. I'm Chuck. This episode is brought to you by LowerGentry Studios. LowerGentry Studios is a film production company that specializes in high-quality productions at a low cost. LowerGentry Studios has an upcoming web series titled Canyon County that you'll be able to see on YouTube this December. Subscribe to their channel to get notifications of new episodes of Canyon County as well as new episodes of this podcast. Today I chat with Scott McIntosh, editor of Idaho Press. We talk about news that the Idaho Press has broken over the years, as well as how important the role of local news and journalism is in the Treasure Valley. If you want to subscribe to a paper that puts national headlines behind the front page, you can visit idahopress.com. $10 a month gets you a daily paper and access to their online articles. Enjoy the podcast. We're on the record.
All right.
Welcome, Scott.
Thank you.
I'm excited to have you on.
Well, thanks for having me.
You recently gave a talk here with Idaho Press.
Yep.
No longer Idaho Press Tribune.
Yep, we dropped the Tribune.
Okay.
Yep.
That's fine.
Yep.
Was there a decision behind that as far as marketability or?
Yeah, it was it was part of our expansion into the Boise market. We went with a marketing firm to kind of talk about our image, and they recommended that we drop the Tribune and go with Idaho Press. You know, our website is already idahopress.com. A lot of people refer to us as Idaho Press anyway. And it's just cleaner and quicker and sleeker, so we kind of went with it.
And once you get that digital real estate, it's easier to go that direction than have things confusing, more people look things up online.
Right.
Mostly anyway.
It's quick, idahopress.com.
Cool.
Yep.
So a couple things. You gave a chat recently about the future of media. You work in the newspaper business, and you guys are expanding.
Yeah.
Which is different.
Yep.
I would just about imagine.
Yeah.
I suppose percentage-wise, you're one of the few in the nation, I would just about guess, that's out there buying other real estate, basically.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really interesting time right now in the newspaper business. And yeah, definitely, I've been in the newspaper business for 25 years now. What I'm doing now with hiring reporters and expanding and buying the Boise Weekly and growing our circulation is unusual in our industry right now. But we see a market opportunity in the Treasure Valley with print, and I can give you the whole background of all that. But right now we just opened a Boise bureau. We purchased the Boise Weekly just a month or so ago. We have 4 news side reporters. Betsy Russell is our Boise bureau chief, and she is a longtime Treasure Valley journalist, very well known, covering politics and state legislature. And then we added 3 reporters. One was Boise City Hall reporter Margaret Carmel, another reporter covering Ada County government, and another reporter covering Ada County cops and courts. And then we have a sports reporter, Brandon Walton, who has done a phenomenal job covering Canyon County sports. He is now our Ada County sports reporter. And then they're housed in the Boise Weekly office, and just having a great time covering Boise and Ada County. I was just looking at story counts, and we're averaging around 400 stories per month, locally written stories between Ada and Canyon County.
Okay, wow.
Yeah.
There is news that goes on locally.
Oh, yeah.
You wouldn't think watching television or listening to the radio. Is that where you're finding your niche? I'm just, having consumed a lot of different media. I've read papers. I haven't read, I've kind of turned a lot of my news off in the last couple of years.
Yeah. Yeah.
since the election, since the precursor to the election, I grew very sick of it. It was like a slow dial back on looking at those types of things, because I mean, there's a lot to go into that. You probably know more about what's happening. And
well, it's funny because about a year ago, I dialed back my news feed on Facebook. So, like a lot of people, I'm on Facebook, and really, I like the vacation photos and the, photos of what you're having for dinner and, what your first day of school. That's what I think Facebook should be. And I found that my Facebook feed was getting filled with news, just way too much, I didn't want to see all that. And so I stopped following a lot of news sites, and Facebook really became much more enjoyable for me because it really was a time to connect with friends and share stuff with them, and not get into political arguments and all that sort of stuff. It may sound self-evident, but I get all my news from newspapers.
Oh, okay.
Obviously during the day, I have to keep an eye on what's going on, and I go on Twitter and I see what's happening locally on Twitter, and I still, follow some sites on Facebook news-wise, but, maybe only 2 or 3. Because during the day I'm really busy and I don't have time to sit and read, an article for 5 minutes that interests me. I wait for the next day's paper to come out, and I sit in the morning and I read my newspaper, and this is part of the strategy that we have at the Idaho Press, is that we still believe that there are tens of thousands of people out there who still want to read a newspaper, and I understand that not everybody gets it or shares in that appreciation of the value of a newspaper. But for me, the basic value of a newspaper is that, I like reading what's happening locally. And I think our niche in particular is local government watchdog. So we are at Boise City Council meetings. We are at Nampa City Council meetings.
I saw you actually were recently at. Your paper came out with a couple headlines as far as like with Mayor Kling, and all the changes that are going on here in Canyon County, especially with what to do with all the people coming in and how to handle that with the infrastructure. And I think your news. That came up on my Google News feed, and it was the Idaho Press that's good on top of that. Just so you know, personally, that makes sense to me now in hindsight.
And that really, and that's our strategy going into this, is that what we do best. What we do better than anybody else is cover local government. City council and school board meetings. County commissioners, Ada County Highway District commission meetings may not seem like the sexiest thing to cover, but last week there was police presence at the Ada County Highway District Commission meeting, and people got rowdy and got escorted out, and over a flap over open government public meeting laws. So we feel that is kind of what newspapers have always done best and what we continue to do best. And we still feel that a lot of people, particularly newspaper readers, that's what they want to read. That's what they are looking for when they subscribe to their local newspaper. They want to see what's going on with their local school board, and they want to see what their property taxes are doing, and they want to see, why ACHD commissioner is in hot water right now. They want to know that there are reporters there at those meetings keeping an eye on what they're doing and looking at the budgets. And so, we've just got out of budget season, and we've written a lot of stories about the city of Caldwell budget and the Nampa budget. And we've got a story coming out about the property tax levy rates in Ada County. So, the experience of reading a newspaper for me is, you want to read your local stories, but you also want to read what happened at the Emmys last night, and a little bit of your, why is Tom Arnold in the news for getting into a fight with Mark Burnett at the Emmys last night, stuff like that. But, there it is in a little brief on page 2. Yep. Got it. Good. I can move on. Read national stories, and international stories, see what's going on in Syria and what's the latest with Trump. It's not going to be on the front page, but it's going to be in there and let you know what's happening with the tariffs. And then, I look at the weather page and I see what the weather's going to be like for the week. I'm good. So I see what it is, and I know what it's going to be like for the week. And then I move on to sports, and sometimes I'll see a story that I really want to read in depth, but I want to see how the Yankees did last night, and I want to see how CUNA did. I have a soft spot in my heart for CUNA, always will, and just want to see how the boys soccer team did last night. And so I, check that out, and I move on to the feature section and the outdoors page, and even the recipes, and then I do the jumble every day, and I look at my horoscope every day, and there are a couple comic strips that I like to read every day. And then, my favorite section of the paper is the legal notices. So I see what's going on with the legal notices. You'll be amazed at what you can find out in the legal notices.
I would never skim those.
Yeah, no, it's really, there's a lot of great stuff in there. And so that's the whole experience of reading the newspaper, and that's kind of what we're trying to bring back, and with heavy emphasis on local news. And we've got folks in Boise. I was just talking to a friend of mine this weekend who finally subscribed to the Idaho Press. He lives in Boise. He doesn't watch a lot of TV, so he didn't see our ads. He's not on Facebook, so he didn't see our social media posts. He didn't really know a lot about us. But he subscribed last week, and I saw him this weekend, and he goes, I can't believe it. I can't believe how many local stories you have. I never knew. I just thought that newspapers were dying, and that's why I wasn't seeing any local stories. But you guys are like, it took me a long time to read your paper. And this was on a Thursday that, he was talking about.
Nice.
So, the newspaper industry for sure has been disrupted, and it started with Craigslist and the advent of the internet. 20 years ago with the internet, and our business model has definitely been affected, and our revenues have been on the decline. Classified advertising was a huge revenue stream for us, and that's pretty much almost all gone. There's still some, but not nearly what it was before. And advertising too. You have a lot of businesses who say, hey, I'm just going to start a website or a Facebook page and hope that people find me, and that's their strategy. Mm-hmm. And which is fine. They definitely need to be online, but if they're not doing print, they're definitely missing a pretty important segment of the population. So there's no doubt that our business model has been affected. And the other thing too is that a lot of people like to think that, well, newspapers were slow to adapt to the internet. And I actually think it's the exact opposite. I think we were way too fast to jump into the internet. And so I've been in newspapers for 25 years. I started in 1994, and this was the year before commercial internet. Mm-hmm. And so I've worked in newspapers before the internet existed. And every newspaper that I worked at, we were, the number one website in the town that we were in. We were the first to jump in. We were the first to put up a news website. We were the first to be putting up our content. And well, if people can get it for free online, geez, I could save some money and not subscribe to my local newspaper anymore. I can still get the news online. And that's what happened. Mm-hmm. And now that we've told everybody that news is free, people are very reluctant to pay for it. And digital, posting news on digital still has not been a sustainable business model. And will it ever be a sustainable business model? I don't know. I hope so, because I know that that's where we're going. But in the meantime, we still feel like there's a runway for print, that there's still revenue, there's still an audience, there's still a market for a printed newspaper. And so our parent company, Adams Publishing Group, which they purchased us in November, they've really made heavy investments in our newsroom and our news product. And we are adding reporters, increasing pages, increasing editors, increasing sections in the paper. And our belief is that that's going to generate revenue, and we're going to grow the newspaper and grow our circulation base. We've already added over 3,000. We're probably around 3,500 new subscribers in just the last 3 months.
Wow.
Yeah.
And you believe that you made a couple interesting statements there about the local news, and then about the fact, and I'm just imagining that the newspapers themselves set the precedent of making the news, the written news, free on the internet, almost as a precursor to the difficulty in establishing value to that, but then also the variability of a national reporter versus a local reporter and being able to survive on that. And I think there's a lot of different mediums that are suffering through that differentiation, and then experiencing kind of a rebirth through local interaction, whether that be print, whether that be music, whether that be filming, any of those types of things. So, I mean, can you talk about the local aspect a little bit?
Yeah.
In more detail, and I'm just guessing, maybe I'm wrong, that might be something that you see in that future of the media talk that you presented earlier?
Anything that has value is scarce. National news is not scarce.
No, it isn't.
Google Trump right now, and how many stories would you get from how many different outlets? What is scarce is local news. I used to own the Kuna Melba News newspaper in Kuna, and I was often the only person at a city council meeting. And,
Wow.
And city council a lot of times really does interesting things, and they do things that are really important, and they do things that really affect people's daily lives. That affects their taxes, their pocketbooks, their way to get home from work, their schools, so there are things, and I was the only one sitting there in the room with the city council members or the school board members. And, if I'm covering something that affects 13,000 people, well, that's going to have value that I am there reporting that and providing that information to those 13,000 people who are not sitting in the room with me. So again, that's our niche. And that's why we put, our front page is almost always local. The first 3, 4, 5 pages of the newspaper are local stories, because those are the stories that you can't get anywhere else. And we have this discussion every day, just about, well, should we put this story? Should we put the Brett Kavanaugh story on the front page? Well, most people already know about it. Most people already read about it. Let's put the Ada County Highway District Commission story on the front page, because nobody else is reporting on that. We're the only ones. And so if people are making a decision about whether they're going to purchase a newspaper, they're going to go with something that they haven't seen already. And so that's kind of our strategy. And local is definitely the niche that we're going for.
That's a good niche. I like that, because you can't. You're right. It's difficult to get local news in general, and television and radio have a limit. I mean, I'm sure you have a page limit, but I would imagine that it would be flexible based on the demand for the news, to where you can get more people and more print put in place. Yeah, we were just, and really we are struggling with this because,
we do have a limited number of pages. We can't just, run 20 pages every day. We're kind of limited by the number of ads that we sell, and that determines how big the section will be. And so it is finite in print, and we try to provide local news, but we've got 9 great reporters, local news reporters, who are just cranking out stories every day. And we've got to get those stories in the paper. And then we also want to have room for national, we can't ignore the Brett Kavanaugh story. We can't ignore the tariff story. We want to get those stories in. So every day we kind of look at the pages and we say, oh, I think we need to take, pages 7 and 8, because we've got so many local stories, but that's only going to leave page 9 for wire or for national stories. So, we're always having that discussion every day. How are we going to balance that? And, we err on the side of local. We try to get as much local in as possible every day.
And you have a priority with, you get do you ultimately sit down and decide what's going to be in the paper? How do you make those calls?
Yeah, we have a meeting. We have a couple of meetings every day. We have a morning meeting at 10:30 where we sit around with the reporters and a couple of editors, and we talk about the news of the day and what everybody's covering, and we prioritize. And so then we kind of go out and execute that game plan. And then at the end of the day at 5 o'clock, the editors get together, and it's, me and Holly Beach is our assistant editor, Tom Hess is our city editor, Greg Lee is our sports editor, Brian Myrick is our photo editor. And we get together and we go over the list of stories that we have produced that day. And we have a discussion, and who thinks that this should be on the front page? Who thinks that this should be on the front page? Should we put this on A3? Should we hold this for next week? Or should we, do we have to get this story in the paper tomorrow really quickly? Mm-hmm. And then we have that discussion and we go back and forth. And sometimes those meetings are 5 minutes. Sometimes they're half hour, just trying to figure out where everything should go. And then we come up with a game plan at the end of that meeting, and that determines what's going to be on the front page and what's going to be inside.
Have you seen, kind of a little bit of a tangent, but you had mentioned earlier you worked in the newspaper for business for a very long time, pre-internet. You said 94 is when you started. Have you seen a connection between the increase in the internet and the decline of local news? And is there reemergence happening right now, or what? Do people think that they are acting on a national level without understanding that not everybody's listening to their Facebook post?
Well, I have a theory. I believe that really there are two different audiences. I really believe that there is a newspaper audience and an online audience. And unfortunately, the stories that we are good at, the stories that newspapers are good at, do not translate well to an online audience. So when you think about what stories get the most clicks and get the most comments and get the most shares, they're usually, not scandalous, but just they're a little bit clickbaity. They're not important, quote unquote, important
headlines. There's a movie that I watched recently, and I can't remember it now to save my life. It was Kirk Douglas. It was an old black and white film where he was a newspaper man do you know the movie I'm talking about? He was running out of Albuquerque, and then this guy was starving in a cave. And
Ace in the Hole?
Ace in the Hole.
Yeah.
That's the one.
Yep. Great movie. Yeah.
It is a good movie. And it was interesting because that came out, like, I want to say in the 50s-ish.
Yeah.
And it was kind of it gave a warning of, watch out for the headlines. Yeah. I had a note I wanted to talk to you too about a lot of what I'm seeing in the national news. I get frustrated and I end up turning it off. It's that reversal of, this is what's happening nationally. Let me find one specific example of a person, just like Mr. Cave and Ace in the Hole, and let me tell their story in detail so that we're spinning the news to be for or against whatever point, and then bring it back. And I feel like it's pushing people to connect with an individual and then connect to the national news, whereas we don't take time to vote for mayor, but we'll all line up to vote for Clinton or Trump. Anyway.
Well, and that's what I always say is that, those elections, those non-presidential elections are probably more important to you personally than some of these national elections. Now, you could make a different argument with the 2016 election and how important that was. But I think that the people should pay a lot more attention to their school board and their city council than they really necessarily need to with the president or their federal legislators, because you're talking about your taxes. Your property taxes are affected immensely by your school board members. The decisions that they make, and the city council members, the decisions that they make affect you directly. But I will say that, I think you hit on a point about what I think we get criticized most for, and I think rightly so, is what do we focus on? It's not necessarily that we have, an explicit bias, but an implicit bias of, well, why did you pick that person? So you found the one person who died of asthma because she couldn't afford an inhaler. Now, that's definitely an important story, and that's illustrative of the issues of healthcare in this country. But is that if that's all you're focused on, and not the broader issues or other people affected differently? So, are you interviewing people whose health insurance premiums have gone up fivefold in the last 2 years? No, you're focused on that one person who couldn't afford health insurance to try to make your point. So I do think that happens, and I think it happens probably more on a national level than it does on a local level. But I think that is it's an important point that I think as members of the media, we need to be cognizant of. And I think to some extent, we have declined in media literacy, but to another extent, I think that the people have gotten much more savvy about media in some respects. That's a double-edged sword, but I think that people kind of recognize that and call it out when they see it.
And you were talking previously, I got you off on a side note. You were talking about the two different audiences.
Yeah.
And so you feel like the online right now is more catered towards people that are consuming national.
Well, and clickbait.
Clickbait.
And I hate the word
and
clickbait.
Is it even consumption at that point? I would just venture to guess not a lot of it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of people that interact online, if you're looking for interactions, it seems like they're quick to interact, and express their opinion rather than inform themselves based on what sentence is thrown in front of them.
Yeah, and it's funny because Facebook comments and Facebook debates are seldom useful, and we have an editorial board at the paper, and we meet every week and we go over issues of the day, issues of the week, and there have been times where we have editorial board members who I like to say they've formed a Facebook opinion. It's a quick one-off, it sounds right, but then if you start thinking about it a little more deeply and think down a couple more levels and think about another perspective to that same issue, you end up coming to a different conclusion. But that initial first jump to conclusion is usually what you see on Facebook, and there's never a nuanced discussion that, I see your point. It's never like that. It's always just like, and a lot of times you can tell that those debates are not even based on that they've read the story, that it really is the headline, that they've read just the headline. They didn't even click on the story.
I think NPR did one of those on April Fool's Day a few years back. I don't know if you read that. No. They had one that forwarded it, and it had like some ridiculous headline, and then it said, "This is a joke. See who reads the article," and then you could scroll through if you wanted to share it. I mean, it was really good publicity for them to get kind of gotcha points and get some attention, but it was kind of funny. I mean, they definitely showed that that's possible, and you could see it in your own friend and family list happening, which doesn't surprise me. Yeah, no, and I've often thought we should just get off of Facebook altogether. It's just sometimes it just feels like such a waste of time. You said you follow to get news. A lot of people on Twitter, and how do you? Because obviously, I would imagine that you have to take a lot of tidbits of information and then try to figure out what is, unless you leave a lot of that to your reporters and your journalists to figure out what's worth investigating, or if you have any way. I suppose there's no shortcuts. You just got to educate yourself and think clearly. But if there's any way to like tease through some of that stuff, and Twitter is more like a news tip. It's like you heard somebody say something, and so. And on Twitter, you definitely have your influencers and you have people that are reliable. And, a lot of the police and fire agencies are on Twitter. And so that's now because they're scanner. And back in my day, when I'm not, that old, but back in my day, we were scanner jockeys. We would listen to the police scanner all the time. And that's what we were
listening to determine whether we're sending a reporter out to cover a car accident or a house fire or anything like that. But now it's all encrypted. Most of it is. And so it's really, the police scanner is much less useful than it used to be. And so sometimes the first time you hear about something will be through Twitter. Ada County Sheriff's Office does a really good job of tweeting out stuff, and Nampa Fire Department does a really good job, and Nampa Police Department is on social media a lot. So, and then there are other people, there are other groups and people who are very active on Twitter that are kind of, they hear this and they hear that, and we, we'll see and we'll say, oh, maybe we should follow up on that. And so for me, Twitter is a very good listening device. Just to kind of see what's happening out in the community.
So you just kind of keep your pulse on that just in case something pops up that's of interest.
I'll edit a story and I'll pull out my phone and...
You don't have a magic wand to like wave over certain headlines and decide whether or not that's legitimate news.
I wish, no. But there are people who are reliable that that you can rely on in the community who generally provide reliable information.
That's good.
Yeah.
So, what is it? You kind of went over some of your meetings and you work with a lot of different people to plan your paper. It's good that you focus locally. Does that help you deal with all of the chaos that's going on in the current political climate as far as the news? Do you feel like you're not suffering as many other agencies might be that are trying to make those appeals?
Yeah, I mean, that's our niche, local is our niche, and we just feel like nobody else is doing it. Nobody else is doing it as well. Particularly in this day and age of social media and the internet, there's a, again, having been in the business for 24, 25 years now, I remember the day when it wasn't news until it was in the newspaper. And we broke news in the newspaper. And people didn't find out about things until it was in the newspaper that morning. And now, that's a little bit of what has affected newspapers in particular, is that it's deflated us a little bit. Well, if there's a house fire and 3 TV stations and 2 newspapers are on the scene and they're Facebook Living it, well, what's the point? What's the point of writing it up and, getting it in the paper the next day? And so, a big part of what drives good journalists is the desire to break stories and to get something first before anybody else. And so by being the first ones to tell everybody that the Canyon County Commissioners are seeking a 2% raise and breaking that news, and the first time that people heard about that was in the newspaper that morning, that is gratifying for us as journalists, that we are the ones who are delivering that news. Now, that kind of a story also does very, very well on social media. Mm-hmm. And so there is some overlap, particularly with a story like that.
Yeah.
But, I personally, get satisfaction out of, the Nampa City Council or Urban Renewal Agency sold the half block in downtown Nampa. Is that going to go crazy and viral on Facebook? No, but that's a really important story.
It's very important for people that are in Nampa driving around on a daily basis and how that's going to affect them.
Right. And what's going to go in there. And so, that's something, going back to the whole, you've got 2 audiences, people who read a newspaper. I think that's why they read a newspaper. They read a newspaper for those stories about what's going on with the local government. Now, the people online, they might not click on that story or comment or be terribly interested in that story. And, I think there's a reason that they don't subscribe to the newspaper, because those kinds of stories do not interest them.
It was kind of sounds like prior the newspaper was the gatekeeper, and now you guys are going out there and finding some of those nuggets that just kind of like lie in plain sight, that are almost lost in the noise with all of the media content and national stuff that gets thrown at everybody on a daily basis, and that device in their pocket.
Yeah.
Almost. Do you have some really good? How long have you been at the Idaho Press?
Almost 5 years. 5 years in February.
Do you have some really proud news stories that you've pulled out in the last 5 years that you had some?
Yeah. I think the biggest and most important thing that we did was our work on the rape kits. So Ruth Brown, who is now with the Statesman, she was with the Idaho Press Tribune before, and Christina Lords, who is also now with the Statesman, was my assistant editor at the Idaho Press Tribune. She was reading the book Missoula about the rapes on campus in Montana, and we were talking about that one night. And so, well, we have College of Idaho here and NNU here in Nampa. Why don't we check with the police departments and see how many, rape calls they get that they investigate. And so we had Ruth work on that. And I'll make a long story short, but she ended up finding out that police agencies were doing rape kits for women, and the number of kits that got tested for DNA and sent to the state lab were all over the board. The city of Nampa was sending only about 10% of their rape kits to be tested, whereas cities like Meridian were sending 90% of their rape kits in to be tested. And we just kept on we filed public records requests for cases, and really found out that whether a rape kit got sent to a state lab for testing really depended on the individual agency and whether they felt like the victim was believable, whether they thought that it would lead to prosecution, whether they felt they really needed to send it for, testing. It was just kind of all over the place. And so Ruth wrote a really great series of stories about it and interviewed police agencies all over the state. And she expanded her investigation all over the state. And after that, Melissa Wintrow, representative from Boise, she read that series and introduced legislation that required police agencies to either submit all of their kits for testing or at least report why they weren't, and get sign-off from the prosecuting attorney's office as to why they did not need to submit it for testing. And the city of Nampa had something like 90 untested kits just sitting on the shelf. So these were women who said they were raped, and they went through the process of having a rape kit done, an examination done on them. And those rape kits, 90 of them over 5 years, just were put on a shelf and left to just sit there. And the law changed that. Yeah. And so our reporting changed all that. The city of Nampa ended up deciding to go ahead and submit all 90 of those into the state lab for testing.
Did any of the women experience justice after that?
Well, we're still working on that.
Okay.
So this is an ongoing story still.
Wow.
Yeah. So I would say that is one of those stories. And I will say that a TV station was doing a story around the same time, because, the rape kits story was a national story, and it was coast to coast, and the backlog of rape kits, and there's all these rape kits and they can't be tested quickly enough, and there's a shortage of forensics workers to work on these rape kits. And one of our local TV stations, while we were working on our story and filing public records requests and getting this data, one of the TV stations did a story saying that the state lab does not have a backlog. Idaho doesn't have the same problem that all these other states have. Isn't this great? And they did this story with graphics and showing
they're not sending them in.
Well, right.
Yeah.
And so then we came out with our story a couple months later, or a couple weeks later, saying, well, yeah, there's a reason there's not a backlog, is because the police agencies aren't sending them in if they did send them in. And so now Idaho does have a backlog because these police agencies are sending all these kits in. And one of the pieces of legislation was adding funding for more lab workers to process all these rape kits. So,
well, good for the Idaho Press. That sounds like the executive branch doing what the judicial branch should be doing, which is an unfortunate breach of many different levels of constitutionality, I guess the word I would just about imagine, but I guess I don't
Yeah,
don't know all
was,
the details.
It was, and I would say not just for me at the Idaho Press Tribune, but that's probably the greatest story that I've worked on in my journalism career, to get that legislation passed and expose a problem that was previously unknown. That's exactly, why we do this.
Well, that's good.
Yeah.
Good for the paper. I didn't know that. I didn't realize that. I mean, I had heard some news, and I do remember all the national news about the rape kits, but I didn't. It just got lost. In me. On me. How long ago was that? Did it start?
Oh, was that 2015? I think our first story was at the end of 2015, and then I think the first legislation came in 2016.
Well, good.
Yeah.
Do you have any other gems that you've pulled out recently?
Oh gosh, you're putting me on the spot.
I am. Well, now I'm very intrigued.
There's I wouldn't say anything on that scale, but I think just on a day-to-day basis, looking at budgets, and I always, we've been looking at the Canyon County budget and the City of Caldwell budget, and I do think that some of these budgets would just get passed and approved very quickly if no one were covering them. But we start writing stories about them, all of a sudden, well, let's table this for another, let's have another public hearing, or let's wait. And in fact, there was just a recent study that came out just a couple months ago. I think it was the Pew Center for Research showed that cities where they had lost their newspaper, the
spending went out of control almost.
Spending went up by 5 to 11%, something like that. Yeah. And I definitely think just the fact that we're watching, I think that, they know that we've got a reporter sitting there taking notes and writing down everything they say and requesting documents, and know that stuff is going to be in the paper the next day. I think that says, oh, geez, maybe we should be a little more careful with the taxpayer dollars here. And then there may be a little
darn
more
accountability.
I know it.
Look what that does to people.
Yeah.
Makes them act accountable.
Yeah. And I think just the mere fact that we're watching them and writing about it just helps keep them on their toes.
So subscribing to the Idaho Press is a good way then to make sure. Do you guys put notifications in on the what's happening locally in the paper as well? So if people on their schedule want to attend these types of meetings and get involved locally with politics, and something that they can make a huge difference in.
Yeah. And that's something that I'm always, telling the reporters, let's get ahead of this story. Let's get it in the paper that they're going to be discussing this on Tuesday or at Monday night city council meeting if people want to testify. The horse park thing at the Idaho Center. So the city was proposing selling off a part of the Idaho Center property, the part of the horse park. And we just wrote a little story about it. Gosh, I can't remember when that was. It was probably a year and a half ago in November of, must have been 2016. And just said that they were contemplating that. Well, the city got inundated with emails and letters from people who read that story, said, you can't sell this piece of property. And I think it was something like 200 people showed up at the city council meeting because we had written that story saying that this was going to be happening. And I think if we hadn't done that, if we hadn't written that story, city council, I think, would have just approved it. Because they're all talking among themselves. They didn't know that there was this contingent out there who would be upset by this. And then it would be after the fact, and they would have, sold the property without anybody really knowing about it. So, it's little things like that that's what we work hard on every day.
Where do you get your news sources, or where do you get the news as far as those meetings are coming up? Do you have to call and ask? How open are these?
They're pretty open, and city council, Nampa, the city of Nampa, they email out their agendas and packets. So, and really anybody can do it. They can go online and click on the link for the packet for that city council meeting, and it'll have all the information, line item and supporting documents for decisions that they're going to be scheduled to make. And the city of Caldwell as well does that. And so they're
So you do that for Caldwell, you do it for Nampa, you're starting to do it for Boise as well.
Mhm.
And then do you cover Meridian?
Yep.
Okay.
Well, and so we also have the Meridian Press is our newspaper,
Oh, okay.
and that's a free weekly newspaper. And Patty Bowen is our Meridian reporter, and I mean, she is on top of it. She's at just about every meeting, planning and zoning meeting, and city council meeting, and just does a really great job of making sure that she's watching out what they're doing. And Meridian is very transparent as well. So I would say that for the most part, the cities do a good job of letting people know, of providing that opportunity. Whether people take advantage of that opportunity or not is up to the people. But I think the cities do a good job. The counties, on the other hand, Canyon County probably doesn't do as good a job as they should.
As far as making sure that everybody's aware of what's...
Yeah, they have meetings that don't have an agenda. They have this thing called an elected officials meeting, and they don't really say what they're going to talk about. And our reporters have learned that that's the meeting you want to go to, because that's usually the time that they talk about, let's build steel trailers and put female inmates in there. That's how we found out about that, at an elected officials meeting that didn't have an agenda. Can you
go into more detail about that story?
Oh yeah. So the Canyon County has an overcrowding issue in the county jail. The county jail has been a problem almost since the day it opened. And it's had all sorts of problems, and it's not laid out well, and it's not built very well. And
that's kind of like another national news story that's hitting home locally.
Right.
I have police officers in my family throughout the country, and they all kind of complain, and correctional officers too that I know well.
Right.
And it seems like you just can throw a dart at the U.S. map, and you run into a area with prison issues, jail issues. Yep. But anyway, continue.
Yeah, and on top of that, they are experiencing overcrowding. And one of the things we found out is that the female inmate population is spiking right now for whatever reason. Yeah.
Do they have like a crime that they're connecting with that? Because that's pretty unusual.
About half of them is drugs.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So
nonviolent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Drug crimes is accounts for about half of the female inmate population. And so in a typical year or on a typical day, they would have as many as 30 or 40 female inmates in the county jail. Well, now it's up to over 100 every day. And so that's exacerbating the problem at the county jail, particularly the overcrowding issue. And so they came up with a solution to contract with a company out of Missouri to build they're basically steel cargo trailers and converted into housing for female inmates. And they're going to put 22 of these units in the parking lot of the Canyon County Jail, and move all the female inmates into these trailers.
Premium parking spots.
Yeah, I don't know. The parking might be, maybe somebody should build a parking garage out there.
Wow, that's really interesting.
Yeah.
I mean, the population growth, it's really an important time, I think, to get involved locally, because this Treasure Valley is the fastest growing area in the country, which that made national news. I think that was not like 6 months ago, if that.
Yeah, a couple months ago.
Yeah, and it's, I would just imagine that with the increase in population, the increase in people consuming illegal drugs has also come right along with it. And if there are certain areas that are experiencing, if that's where the drug trafficking is happening, I wonder if that's connected somehow.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, I think crimes are up, across the board, and drug crimes certainly are part of that. And we just had a story in the paper this week about justice reinvestment. Actually, today, Tuesday? Yeah, we had it in today's paper. The Justice Reinvestment Initiative seeking to get nonviolent offenders out of the prison system and into parole and probation and rehabilitation.
Is this a local
and so that's a
movement?
state. So
Okay,
that's a state
Okay.
issue. But that affects the jail population. And in fact, that's
Treasure Valley probably more than most other areas of the state because of the huge population increase, I would just about imagine.
Right. And so the state is looking at a $500 million proposal to expand the prison system, including building a new prison, 1,400.
Wow.
I think 1,400 bed prison.
Okay.
So we're talking about $500 million, $500 million.
That's a pretty decent
to
amount of
expand
money.
the prison system, and
Not a lot of people in Idaho.
and think about what you could do with $500 million in terms of drug rehabilitation or drug treatment programs, instead of putting people in prison. And they're at the same time they're talking about getting rid of mandatory minimums and looking at sentencing reform, and so it's a big debate, and it trickles down right to the local level. And Canyon County is looking at building a $200 million jail to replace the current jail.
Wow.
So you want to talk about things that are going to affect your pocketbook. These are really important issues that are going to affect everybody's tax bill.
Yes. And I feel like there's a tradition, and I'll speak here. You don't have to chime in if you don't want to, but there's just a kind of a tradition. If you have government in place and they continue along a path, unless there's somebody to kick them into gear, they're not going to change. They're not going to shift course, as long as they find a way to continue to trudge forward with whatever direction that they initially started, rather than taking the time to look back on it and take input. And, a decision that they made 10, 20, 30, 40, however many years ago, they might just continue to apply today without taking into account any changes in the climate, social climate, political climate.
Well, in some ways, the easiest thing to do is to build a $500 million prison. I mean, you just build it, you spend the $500 million and you just continue doing what you're doing. And that's, in some ways, that's the easiest solution. The harder solution is sentencing reform or changing drug laws,
getting
treatment.
Programming involved. So I worked with kids. I was a social worker for years here in Canyon County, so I got to experience some of that firsthand, as far as working with some of the teenage clients, and then seeing the difference between sending them away to juvenile detention facilities versus trying to figure out what's going on. There's a lot of different underlying issues there. Usually the drugs aren't the problem. If they go to see a counselor, it's not that they have a drug addiction. It's something is leading them to a drug addiction.
So we're working on a story right now. Emily Lowe, our Cops and Courts reporter, is working on a story right now about these adverse childhood events, ACE.
Okay, yeah.
This is really a hot thing right now.
Yeah, it is.
And there's some movement locally from a couple of different groups, including the Idaho Youth Ranch is really big on this, that there's such a strong correlation. It's a direct proportion of ACEs to later problems.
Mental illness, drug abuse, especially.
Yep.
Depression,
with the criminal
anxiety.
justice system, just all sorts of things. And so the idea is you either try to mitigate those ACEs early on to try to, educate parents to try to minimize those, or if you recognize that a kid has these ACEs, treat him differently. So rather than send him to detention because he messed up in school, well, figure out why he lashed out in school. Why did he get in a fight? Why did he, yell at the teacher? Why did he, throw his pencil across the room? Don't just send him to detention, come up with some other avenue for figuring out what's going on with this kid. So a lot of interesting stuff going on, that really is looking at the root causes. And would it be smarter to spend $500 million in that early intervention than it is to just build another prison?
And then alleviate future problems, hopefully.
Well,
It's expensive. It's cheap, quote unquote, to give kids, counseling for a few years, at a young age, versus continually having them go through the system over and over and over again until they end up,
and they,
living with room and board.
Right.
Living with room and board on the state's dime, on our dime, because we don't want to help.
Yeah. Well, and the ideal is that would actually be a cost savings in the end. You know, you spend the money up front and you don't have to spend the money later on.
And the social issue, I mean, it's just tough. The social issues are very difficult. I think there's a lot of different things that we look at. You know, like Medicaid is a huge boost. I mean, it's different. Idaho is I really like Idaho living in this state. It's got a good mix of the conservative values for the most part are just kind of leave people be, from what I've run into, you know, but the drug thing is kind of a different paradigm, I think, because there's still that wanting people to make the right decision, and then that black and white switch of this is a bad thing, you know, versus not a bad thing, and then associating that with other crimes that might be violent and or affecting another person. It's such a tough issue because I feel like a lot of the recent history has been national intervention on that level, you know, helping people out in poverty through programs like Medicaid and food stamps. And I don't see a lot of connection. And maybe that's just me, as far as like, unless you look at churches and the way that they interact with people, as far as like the community coming and getting involved in those issues, which would be a much more effective and targeted effort when it comes to social intervention, I believe. I don't know if you see anything different on the horizon. That's good that you're doing some reporting about the prison system.
Yeah, you know, and again, these are, you know, quote unquote liberal kind of ideas, and I think in a conservative state, what I think people like, you know, at the Idaho Youth Ranch or other organizations that are trying to advocate for these things, they're trying to say, you know, this can still be a conservative idea because you're going to be saving money.
Yes.
You know, so it's a fiscally sound thing to do.
Economic conservative values versus socially conservative values, rather than intertwining the two.
Right.
Trying to tease those apart at a local level to be able to help people and also save tax money.
Well, and here's the thing, you know, the conservatives and Republicans tend to you know, espouse personal responsibility, and that's one of their great platforms is personal responsibility. And so they tend to see that if somebody is addicted to drugs or alcohol, well, they're failing in their personal responsibility. And, you know, to help them is just, you know, some liberal, you know, bleeding heart, just give away government money. But I think what there's becoming a realization that, well, if somebody is not upholding their personal responsibility, that has an effect on all of society. So if they're addicted to drugs, yeah, sure, that's their problem and whatever, and they, you know, need to take care of that. But if they're going and robbing your house to get money for their drug addiction, well, that affects you now. So now that has an effect on all of society. And so, you know, you may not want to help this person and they just need to buck up and have personal responsibility. But, you know, if it's affecting all of society, you know, that's something that maybe, you know, we need to look at.
Do you think that there's going to be a change? I hope that the local news trend continues. Do you think that there's going to be a change as far as the community is concerned? I don't know if you've seen a change here. I've lived here for about 10 years, but it's just since like the 80s, and then growing up in the 80s and early 90s, I feel like communities have become more isolated. Do you see any correlation between those two things changing? Do you are you in agreement with anything that I'm saying right now?
Yeah, you know, it's funny because, you know, I think you definitely are getting a more, and I don't know if this is what you're referring to, but I think there's definitely a more liberal bent, obviously, to Boise, and I think it's increasing. So I think people who have more of a liberal bent will move to a place like Boise. I think that, you know, you have a lot of people moving to Idaho because they're conservative. So I'll meet people from Pennsylvania or New Jersey or California, and you'll think, oh, okay, well, this is East Coast liberal coming to Idaho. California, here's a California liberal. Well, the reason they left New Jersey or California or Pennsylvania is to because Idaho is conservative. And so, the in-migration of Californians and people from other parts of the country doesn't necessarily mean that there's going to be a liberalization of Idaho. In fact, it actually might mean that that Idaho's going to become more conservative. Now, I do think that there are some people who are moving to Boise from places like Seattle or Portland or California, and finding that that they are more liberal, and they're finding that they can still have a place in the cities. I think the big question is, will places like Meridian and Nampa become more liberal? Mm-hmm. And I think there's a lot of people who are watching, how those state legislative races go. Is it going to become more Democrat than Republican? So far, it's not. In a lot of ways, it's become, Democrats lost more seats in the state legislature last go around. And so It'll be interesting to see how it goes this time around in November, because you do have Medicaid expansion on the ballot, which is probably going to bring out some more Democrats. Paulette Jordan, if her campaign gets back on its feet, will probably energize a more liberal base in Idaho. And so it'll be interesting to see if more liberal folks come out to the polls in November.
That's going to be,
I think it's going to be a very interesting election.
And there's been a huge change, I think, just in the last, it feels like a huge change population-wise just in the last 6 months to a year here in Idaho, but maybe it's just my neighborhood.
Well, and I think it's getting more attention. I think the rising home prices has been getting so much attention, so much news, and so much attention from the media that I think it's making it seem like a really big issue. And definitely we're definitely the fastest growing, and it certainly has brought its problems. But I think it's been a steady increase over the past 4 or 5 years.
And we might have just had the road infrastructure to be able to handle it up until a few months ago.
Yeah, right.
Might be one of the main issues, that it starts to become more noticeable in a short span of time.
Yeah, transportation and education are the two big problems with growth that I think we haven't figured out, and I think they're just going to get worse the more we grow. And
so the Idaho Press is a good source to be able to keep up on all of those changes as they occur, and make sure that you're informed so you don't miss out on.
I believe so. I think that's our role, and that's what we're going to continue to do.
Excellent. Well, it's been about an hour.
Wow,
so
that was fast.
I know it does go pretty quickly, but I thank you for coming on, and idahopress.com to sign up for delivery. And what does it run?
It's $10 a month.
Oh, wow.
And that's whether you get the printed paper, or you just want to do digital, or you want to do Sunday only. It's $10 a month.
Excellent. And you can pick up you said the Meridian Press is available throughout Meridian?
Yep. Yeah, 15,000 households throughout Meridian, delivered free.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And then you also, the Boise Weekly.
Boise Weekly, we just purchased the Boise Weekly, and we have plans to insert that into the Idaho Press so that subscribers of the Idaho Press will also get the Boise Weekly.
Oh, good idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a solid little paper if you're living in Boise, as far as knowing what's going on the weekend, for sure.
Yeah.
Keep yourself entertained.
Yep.
Excellent. Well, thanks so much for coming on, Scott. I appreciate you.
Thanks for the invite. I really appreciate it. This was fun.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right.